Good afternoon, everybody. We're going to talk about reusable components. Now, this is a talk that is inspired by many, many years of experience on my part. So as a consultant, I work with dozens of companies every year, and I help a lot of different companies improve what they're doing in React in particular. So these are the lessons that I've learned over many years, and I've tried to boil them down to the key pieces. Now, the thing that I find really interesting about reusable components is it's a lot like other things that developers do. I think we all have this feeling that if you build it, the people will use it. And I think about this movie with Kevin Costner from back when I was a kid, the movie Field of Dreams back in the 90s. And really odd plot, but he just goes out in a field and he hears people telling him to build a baseball field, and then he does, and the ghosts show up. I don't know who writes this stuff, but they were good drugs. And now we have this movie. But when we create reusable components, when we create anything reusable, a reusable function, any kind of abstraction, we are hoping that people will find it useful, but that is a heck of a gamble. There is no guarantee that people will put these things to use. So my take is, in React is pretty simple at its core. React has this idea that if I am copying and pasting code, I should probably create a component. And if I'm copying and pasting logic, I should probably create a hook. Like those two rules right there, those fundamentals are part of what continues to make React so wonderful, or these powerful primitives. We find ourselves repeating UI, we have a solution, that's JSX and components themselves, and we repeat logic from time to time, hooks put that together. And what I really like is we can take those two fundamentals and you think of them as Lego blocks and you can glue them together. And I can say this logic is reusable in a lot of different UIs, and this UI is reusable with lots of different logic, and let's compose these together. Very powerful idea. So I can't set my clicker down or it slides. Okay. But the thing that I've realized is creating components themselves is quite easy, but creating reusable components is hard. And the reason that it's hard is a lot of different reasons. I like to say that creating reusable components is doing React on hard mode. And the reason that is when somebody hands you a ticket, they tell you to build a feature. You are being asked to do something very specific. You are to write code to solve a particular problem in a particular place and time. When you write a reusable component, you are being asked to solve a problem that you haven't fully seen that will be used by someone else in the future. Good luck. You've got to hope and guess and think about all the edges, and this is where the moment that somebody gives me a pull request that contains a reusable component, I know I need to buckle up, go fill my Route 44 Dr. Pepper, like sit down for a while and read this thing. And you got to really think about it because there's a lot of ways for that to go sideways. When I say a lot of ways, the list of ways is kind of silly. This list that's popping up here is a non-exhaustive list of decisions that you might need to make if you're going to create a reusable component today. Now, this presumes that you're creating a reusable component library, but most of these decisions apply even if it's a single component. A couple things to think about here. If we were in an interview right now and I said, can you tell me some decisions that you need to make when you create a reusable component? Some of these would come to mind for you, but a lot of these may just be totally off the radar. It would be difficult to list all of this. Now this is 50 decisions. That's a lot of decisions, and that's precisely why I say creating reusable components is hard. I've had companies come to me, and one came to me recently saying, we've tried to create this component library, but it's not working. It's not working at all, and then we have a conversation about why, and one of the things we found was the way that they created that component library was flawed. And it was flawed because management said, go build an application, and while you're building that app, create reusable components out of it, and we're going to use those components on other apps. Sounds fairly reasonable, but the problem you run into is if you tell developers, go build an app and build the reusable components, what tends to happen is product owners, which is more important to the product owner, do you think? The dang app. Yes. We measure what we manage, and management's going to make dang sure that we build the actual app and that we hit our deadlines. And the reusable component thing is going to kind of be an afterthought. People will just throw things against the wall and keep moving. So that's one of the reasons it's really difficult. Another reason that it's difficult is I just showed all those decisions, and all those decisions come down to conversations between humans, and conversations between humans can get entertaining. It is hard to predict how things might come out. And all of us have religious sort of feelings about some of this stuff. You think about how, like this room, I imagine a fair number of us are rather, you have almost this religious fondness to react over alternatives, but we have to remember that honestly, if we are honest, you can solve the same sorts of problems in Vue and Svelte and Ember and etc. And lots of you nod your heads, and we have to just say that out loud from time to time to recognize like a lot of these decisions. A related quote, this has been in my head a lot recently, much ado about nothing, but nothing is as important as you think it is while you are thinking about it. Like right now, I could really get myself riled up and go, oh my gosh, I've got to nail this. Like all these people are looking at me. If I stutter, if I say the wrong thing, this could be earth-shattering. Like I could completely ruin my life. And no, like it's actually just not that important. This is just a little moment in time. And the more that you can recognize, like a lot of this stuff is just fleeting and ephemeral and not worth fighting over. Because we're going to have to make decisions as a group, and we're going to have to compromise. Now, I've noticed many companies create reusable components, but the developers don't use them. And I tweeted out this list a little while ago. This is just me thinking off the top of the head of all the ways that I have seen people say, I'm not using the component because X. And this is also funny. Even though I've helped a lot of companies create components, sometimes I have dog-fooded those components. So I actually led a team. I was working at AutoTrader at the time as a principal, and it was my job basically to lift all boats. I would come in each day, and all my goal is my boss says, help everybody be more successful. Help us find new technologies, help us improve our testing, and so on and so on. So I, at one point, helped us create a reusable component library in React and created that foundation. Ultimately, they created a team around that and gave me 6 reports, and that kept me quite busy. But we had this model of dog fooding. And the term dog fooding simply means eat your own dog food, as in if you're going to create components, you should be forced to consume those components and see if they taste good. And when I was dog fooding on those teams, I would often go, oh, why did I do this? I thought that I could hard code this value, and it turns out I couldn't. I have painted myself into a corner. My API is not flexible enough. Or, oh, I created this table component, and I wish I could just put TD and TR, but I required somebody to create this big, ugly object instead, and it's hard for me to hold this in my head. I can't really see what it renders. I wish I could put JSX in here instead of a big object. The ergonomics of it punched me in the face once I had to live with my decisions, even though it was easier to code. So that's important. But that's how we get to this point, all this sort of stuff. So in this talk, we're going to talk about 7 keys to writing reusable components. Key 1, start small. Now, I'm going to skip past that because I want to get to this. All of us, regardless of what we do, start out with an audience of 0. Nobody is using our stuff. You create a component, and this is true whether you're creating a component for a single project or for open source and hoping that everybody uses it, like Material UI, for instance. Start with a project. Prove that that component is useful in multiple spots in a project. That vets it at step 1. So have we used this date picker in multiple places? Have we used the tab in multiple places? After that, move on and say, okay, maybe we could share this across multiple projects within a team or an organization. Maybe we could use it across our business, and then ultimately we could think about open sourcing it, making it public. I've helped companies do that as well. And that can be a good way to get goodwill and attract talent as well. So the reason that this progression is important is difficulty. The more that you move to the right, the harder it is. And the more that you move to the right, keep in mind, I said writing components is doing React on hard mode, writing reusable components. The more that I move to the right, the harder it is to guess exactly how everybody's going to use my stuff. You go look at any popular open source project, and you'll often find hundreds or thousands of open issues. And those open issues exist not because the developer was bad, but because the developer couldn't foresee all these bizarre things that people would do with their code. Who saw that coming? Key number 2, you need a design system. And you need a design system for this reason. The old saying, we're nailing Jell-O to the wall. Without a design system, we don't have a target. Now, you might not know exactly what I mean by a design system. Well, this is sort of an example of a design system. Design systems contain opinions, and those opinions are going to be things like typography, white space, colors, icons, values, your voice and tone, and so on. All of those things give us clarity about the components that we're going to create. Without a design system, what happens is we create a bunch of components that don't actually meet any particular goal because we never said what our goal was. And what happens is designers come and go on different projects and we don't actually have a documented plan of attack. So we end up saying, that date picker, no. It's going to look like this now. Now it's going to look like this. Side note, that is one of the hard parts. I have seen designers love being creative. And if you tell designers we've already got a design system, then they're like, all right, well, I'll go to a new company and I'll go create a design system. And I've seen this company, I was doing work at a healthcare company, and this gal I was working with was super talented. And she gave me beautiful designs, and I was super excited to build them all because it was thoughtful, and she did a really good job. And the moment that we finished, she said, oh, sorry, I'm leaving. And I totally got it, because I'm going, you have accomplished what you wanted to here. We worked together really well, but I went, oh. And then her replacement came in, and her replacement was not near as good. And her replacement wanted to start changing things, and every change they suggested, I went, no, that doesn't even fit into what was done historically. You're just wanting to make it your own, and that's not actually helpful. So sometimes you actually may have to escalate, because sometimes people just want to do work, and doing work isn't inherently valuable. If we've already got the problem solved, we can invent problems here. Developers do this too. Have you ever heard of us suggesting a rewrite? Yeah, we're all guilty. Figma is not a design system. Figma can contain information about your design system, but Figma itself is not. And I hear people say this, they'll go, well, we got a Figma, and that Figma is the requirements for a given application. But if it's not intended to be a design system, and often it's not, then you need something else. Now, Spectrum. Adobe Spectrum is a design system. I would encourage you to Google Adobe Spectrum. They are, I think, one of the best public examples out there. It is super meaty, lots of docs, lots of examples. Notice what's on the left. We've got design tokens, theming, color, typography, illustration, icons, international, inclusive design, data viz. Like, those are a lot of concerns. And your company probably has opinions on these, but you've never actually sat down and codified them. Without a design system, you are moving goalposts. That's why the design system is important. Now, an example of a good way to create a design system is Zero Height. Zero Height is basically a content management system that is designed to help you quickly create a design system. So we've heard of CMSs for a while. You go out there and you got boxes you type in and you get to see the results. But Zero Height basically has little slots and plugins for saying, all right, tell us about your typography rules. Tell us about your voice and tone and so on. So it pushes you in the direction of really quickly creating a design system. Smart idea. I really feel like this is a business model that has legs. Like, go create CMS for X. I say that like people aren't doing that. There are countless CMS for X out there, but I'm trying to figure out the one that isn't built yet. Then I'll make my millions. All right, key number 3. Start rigid. And this may seem strange as a developer to suggest this, but here's what I mean. There are all sorts of ways that we can make a component flexible. It's styling, such as colors, padding, size, and font. It's layout, whether it's horizontal or vertical, or whether it has media query cutoff points, how it displays data, the logic inside of it. Now, developers love making things configurable. You feel little better about yourself. You made it real flexible. That was better than rigid, right? Not necessarily. What it actually is a trade-off like every other decision that we make. And if there's one thing that I've learned over the last 10 years tweeting a lot is almost every time that I say always or never, I get called an idiot and they're right. Because I go, oh yeah, well, okay, maybe not quite always. There are some exceptions to always and never. So this is an example. Isn't flexible better? Not necessarily. In fact, rigid has a lot of benefits. It's simpler to implement, simpler to create, easier to understand, easier to test, less work to maintain, and because it contains more opinion, you're going to get more consistency in your user interface and feel less fatigue. It's also easy to add flexibility and hard to remove. Now, we've probably all seen this before. I was working at a company where we shipped a feature. One client ended up using it. Everybody else said it was rubbish. I say rubbish because I always like the way the English say that. I feel like as Americans, we should try to pick this up. Total sidebar. So no one else used it but one client. And at some point, we were spending a lot of time iterating on it because this one client was constantly saying, this could be better, this could be better. And somebody in leadership on the development side said, you know what, this is stupid. We're spending a whole bunch of time for this feature for one client. Let's just remove it. We tried to remove it, and that one client screamed loud enough at the right people that we had to keep it and keep maintaining it. Once you have given people a taste of something, it's really hard to take it away. So flexibility, though. Flexibility is useful. It makes it reusable in more context. Self-explanatory there. But notice this lopsided setup. If I were to ask the room before I showed this, which is better, a component that's really rigid or a component that's very flexible, you would probably think flexible, but that's forgetting a lot of these trade-offs here. The reason that we make things overly flexible has everything to do with this idea of the tragedy of the commons. This is why we can't have nice things, is another way that you'll hear this. If we had a bunch of grassland over here near the conference center and we said anybody could bring their goats and their cows to come graze here for free, it wouldn't be very long before that was just a muddy pit. Because everybody'd bring them out and, all right, it's been grazed to the point that it's no longer useful, but thanks, that was some nice free land. When we all act in our own self-interest, things fall down. The way that this looks in components is like this. Why can't we just make it configurable? Just add a prop that says is Tuesday. That's all I'm asking. You know, when it is Tuesday, we'll do this other thing. Well, maybe the answer is we should create another component because props are easy to add. It's not a technical limitation. It is really just an issue of getting rid of things later. And this also does mean if you've got a component library, you need a dictator. You need somebody who has true authority to say no. And it should be rather difficult to override their authority. People should have to escalate to their boss and really sell the boss as well. And that's a pretty risky thing to do because if you escalate to the boss and if I'm managing that UI library and multiple times people escalate to my boss and I'm wrong, either I'm consistently out of touch or my boss is, but something's got to change here. So there's a tug of war that happens, and that tug of war is between flexibility and consistency. And it's between features and simplicity. I'm emphasizing all these trade-offs because, boy, who was it? Rich Hickey had said that developers know the benefits of everything and the costs of nothing. Like that's one of the core problems here. Like we know adding more props gives us some more flexibility, but we don't easily catch all the costs to it. If we want to have less decision fatigue, then we need to reduce the number of props. And once we reduce the number of props, we naturally get more consistency. Here's an example of this. Just today, I'm looking at someone created a reusable chip component. And by chip, I mean just a little div that contains some text in it, and it could be a colored background. And that colored background might be red or green or blue, and those colors represent different statuses, in this case for shipments, because one of my clients is a shipper. And the prop for that was a string. Now, what's wrong with the prop there being a string? for color. And maybe I shouldn't say wrong. What is the trade-off that we're making there? The fact that it's a string, rather than, say, a finite list of potential options. Yeah?
Not as dynamic.
So you say it's not as dynamic. Well, it is infinitely configurable. You could put any valid hex code into this prop and make it any of those colors. But we know that that's not actually our requirements. There are one of 6 colors that a chip can be, because there's only 6 meanings for a chip. So instead, what we should have is a prop that specifies the 6 settings there. And we don't have to put hex codes in there. We can give them good names like success and failure and delayed and so on. And now this API oozes information and it speaks in the language of the people. And I'm not looking at hexes and wondering if that's the right one that gives me the corresponding things. I've also enforced consistency because now I can't put some random color in there and everybody's wondering, why is this one hot pink? That's not one of our colors. It's nice, but saw Barbie, but okay. Props are easy to add, but hard to remove. I know I've said this multiple times, but this is really worth emphasizing. And more broadly, features are easy to add and hard to remove in our applications. I have made the mistake of that more than once. So start rigid and add props when necessary. Okay, on to key number 4, which is it's important to choose our foundations carefully. Isaac Newton said that if I have seen further, it's by standing on the shoulders of giants. And I bring up this quote because there are over 1 million packages on NPM today. Over 1 million. Biggest package manager in the world. So the number of options that we have is crazy. And that doesn't mean that they're all worth using. There's a point where maybe the abstraction is too small. Left pad is that great public example where, really? Do we need a package for that? Lots of good libraries out here that are worth considering. Material UI, Radix, Chakra, Ant Design, AriaKit. These are all great. And if you were to start from scratch, literally from scratch, you have a very long road ahead before you get to where these are. The number of commits, the amount of thought and care that has gone into these is huge. Now, none of these may fully fit what you want. In fact, it's highly unlikely that these fully fit what you want, but you can stand on the shoulders of giants and start with one of these, and that can be a great way to go. And you also have to ask yourself, there is a large portion of applications that we build where designers don't want to hear this, but where the aesthetics of it are not going to be the difference between success and failure. Now, I'll also say, I believe the vast majority of apps we build, whether you use React or Angular or Vue or Svelte, whatever, is not going to be the difference between success or failure. It really comes down to, do you have developers that are being given useful requirements? Do they understand the technology? Will they meet deadlines? Will they stay within the lines? So on and so on. The reason that I bring up all these components and standing on the shoulders of giants is it's easy for us as developers to think about it like we're constructing a building, and like at first, we've got to make these technical decisions and we've got to get them right. So we got to argue for hours and go back and forth and try to get, no. That's not the way development is. I mean, honestly, each component is its own foundation. So we don't have to choose and say, all right, we're going to use AriaKit for everything, or we're going to use ShadCN for everything. No, most of the component libraries that I see are a soup. And by soup, I mean they're a mixture. They end up saying, for instance, all right, we like Material UI. That suits us quite well. We'll use it as a starter. But then here's this date picker. We like their date picker instead. Here's this accordion over here. I like the way it works better. And we pull it together and we'll skin them. And now we've got this mixture of open source projects. We didn't have to write code because we just pulled things off the shelf. Other people have a component library like that? Probably a mix. Nobody? Wow. Okay, there we go. Some hands, thank you. Starting to think I was a weirdo. Okay, so.
Doesn't it make too many libraries, like, isn't it become heavy?
So your concern is, if I take a bunch of libraries, won't it become heavy? And I'm actually glad you said that. Yes, that is a huge risk, especially if you say, let's take one component from Ant and one from MUI and one from AriaKit, because every one that you grab is pulling along a rather heavy set of basics that are there, even if you use one component. What I tend to see is, like this example right here. We use Material UI, but there are 1 or 2 components in there that are missing, and we're going to go find an open source component that's pretty lean and pull it in and make it fit there. So, because it's the whole thing of none of the existing libraries completely meet our needs, so we'll try to 90% it. This will be our focus, but not everything. Thank you for bringing that up. That's a great concern. So when I meet with teams, though, there are basically 4 or 5 ways that you could think about starting a component library. And this is the simplest way to go. Lots of companies have done this, where you just put something in the README and say, use this for components. And your project, everybody goes there, they go out to the site, they use it. There's a lot of downsides to this, though. For instance, I've seen this happen plenty of times. All of a sudden, there's a major release, and now the docs are showing some other version. It doesn't fit, and we're on the old one, and what are we going to do? Every time I go to the docs, I've got to remember to go select the old version. We also find things like, oh, well, we're going to use these components, but not this component here, or we've actually forked this component and made our own local, so you can't always go to the docs. There's various downsides to this. It's easy, but long-term it can be a little painful. So you can build your own, you can wrap, you can fork, or you can gin. These are 4 different ways that you could create reusable components. Let me show a little example of each one of these. If you're going to wrap, this is what it looks like. I go ahead and create a function, and then I call MUI. So imagine that I want to create my own button, but I want to change the way that MUI works in various ways. Well, I could wrap it and then make it do other things. Now, I also want to point out, MUI is one of those rare exceptions where their theming is more than just visuals. You can use their themes to actually specify props as well. So you could end up changing defaults on props and setting certain things. So you can go beyond aesthetics there, which is pretty cool. But at some point, you're going to find maybe you want to wrap it so you can add other logic in and make it better. So this is a very simple pattern. Number 2 is fork it. And by that, I mean you literally go click the fork button on some open source component. Now, the downside with this is now you own the code. So if there are breaking changes later, if there are bugs in it, it's your responsibility to pull these back. But yeah, now you do have more power. Or you could generate it. And when I say generate it, shadcn is the most popular way that I've seen right now in React. This is getting a lot of attention recently. So shadcn is special because what you do is you say generate button, and it spits out a button component in a file for you. And it contains TypeScript, it contains Tailwind styles, it contains a Daisy UI component. Daisy UI is one of the component libraries I haven't really talked about yet. It contains forward ref support and default args, a number of different variants. So like automatically, I'm going to get a variant for button that's primary, secondary, outline, and so on. And at that point, though, the other cool thing is, although I generated it from this, now it's my code. I can just run with it from there. Now you might wonder, well, what the heck? What about when shadcn changes 6 months from now? They provide a diff tool to let you update. I haven't tried it yet. I'm a little skeptical, frankly, but also you think about things like a button or an accordion, you wouldn't really expect there to be any big, heavy ripples later. You could largely probably just copy and paste the new one over yours and make some minor things. So I do like this setup. Now this is highly opinionated though, because what you're getting with this is Daisy and Tailwind. So Daisy is a component library, Tailwind is a styling solution. But if you happen to be cool with those opinions, this will get you going very quickly and you have full control over the code. Okay, key number 5, honor HTML. So it's surprising to me how often I see developers writing HTML that is lacking in semantics. And this is really important to me because I think accessibility is important, and I'm excited recently how many more people are paying attention to accessibility. It is not just important for accessibility, it's also important for developer experience, it's important for automated testing. All 3 of these ideas like glue together. And one thing I've been asking here recently is, and I've been rather heartened by this, let's see if it happens in here. How many of you in here have ever used a screen reader? So if I'd asked that question at a conference even 2 years ago, I would get 1 or 2 hands in a room this size. So we're growing up. Like that, I should have taken a picture of that and shown it to Todd. Like friends of mine that are in accessibility consulting are seeing it too. It's just, I feel like, man, that is really cool. That makes my day. Okay, so I'm preaching to the choir. Let me move ahead. When I talk about honoring HTML, though, again, it's not just accessibility. It's also usability. It's also being able to save ourselves time. So this example of honoring HTML, I know it's kind of small in here, but that button on top has a prop of text equals submit. What's the downside of that API? There's a couple. Yeah?
It's not familiar.
It's not familiar, yes. There's a great book on design by a guy named Steve Krug, who the title of it was Don't Make Me Think. Read it years ago and I loved it. Highly recommend it. It's a really quick read. But the core point is, if your design makes me think when otherwise it could have been intuitive, that's a sign that the design could be better. And that's an example here. Now I'm having to learn a new API when the old one was fine. What is restrictive about this? The fact that it accepts a text prop. What can't I do now? Yeah, what if I want an icon button? How do I put an icon within a text prop here? What if I want to have some bold text or italicized text partially in there? I have now lost power. So there's a reason, like HTML is one of the most vetted APIs in the world. It's been around forever. It's been solving problems for a long time. So if we deviate from it, here be dragons. That's the risk. So another example of it is this. I've made this mistake before. As a developer, it's really easy to think, okay, I want to have this component that displays a list. And as developers, we think in terms of arrays, but maybe it'd be nicer for us to have a list item child component, and we have a compound component story here. So who would prefer to use the one on the right? That feel better? Motion passes. That was a majority, yes. So, and this is more desirable because it feels a lot like an unordered list or an ordered list. I just compile these inside. I have made this mistake on tables. Like, I don't want to have to configure a table via data. I want to configure a table via tags because it just feels more like HTML. Okay, rule number 6. We're down to 2 rules, and then it is time for party. Oh, wait, no. There's a keynote. Yeah, keynote, then party, right? Okay. Getting ahead of myself. Okay, rule number 6. Use the rule of 3. So Jeff Atwood talked about how a reusable component should be tried out in 3 different places before it will be sufficient to accept into a general reuse library. And the reason that I quote Jeff Atwood on this is because he lived this very idea. Years ago, when Stack Overflow was created, it was a surprising success. Everybody was using it, and they realized that they were onto something. Jeff and Joel, who were the co-founders. And they realized, well, we should make some clones of this site. When they decided to do that, though, they made a very interesting decision. They clicked copy and paste. They copied and pasted the entire code base of Stack Overflow, put it in another repo, and then they created server fault from that copy and paste. And as a developer, you might find that horrifying. But that's not all. After they created server fault, they clicked copy, and then they hit paste again. And they created super user. So at that point, they had copied and pasted their code twice. But also at that point, they now had this really clear view. They said, all right, now we could start going through and we could see all the stuff that was repeated. This should be an abstraction. This should be an abstraction. This is reusable. And they started slowly removing things that they could. But after that rule of 3, after they had used this stuff in 3 places, they had a real sense of confidence in their APIs. Whereas they talked about this, if you go back to the Stack Overflow podcasts, which I learned so much from them because they did that podcast, I think, weekly for quite a while. Because Stack Overflow, if you're old enough to remember, there was a point that it was the center of the universe. It was so amazing when it came out, how much better it made our lives. It was at least as big a deal as ChatGPT and Copilot feel today. It was huge. And they talked about how there was no way that they were going to guess what was reusable up front. It was hard to see until they'd done that copy and paste. And this worked out for them very well because now Stack Exchange contains a huge number of sites out there that continue to be very successful. So he said that once we proved the Stack Overflow engine could scale to these 3 distinct communities, I was comfortable pursuing Stack Exchange. Now there's over 100 sites in there. So the rule of 3 is try a component in 3 spots before placing it in a reuse library. I have ignored this rule at times, honestly, because I thought, how hard could it be? I think we got it pretty much right. Sometimes I did, and sometimes it bit me. Sometimes I was very wrong, and we got out there and we had to completely change the API. So a little bit of copy and paste is okay. I would encourage you, if you're going to copy and paste though, put a ticket on the board that makes sure that that's captured, that, hey, we're going to go back and these are the places it's used, and we'll clean that up. Okay, we're down to our last rule here. Key number 7 is it's a product. It is a product. This was something that seemed rather self-evident to me, and I don't know how much it's because of my history. So I'm a strange mix. I was a double major. I got a major in computer information systems, but I also got a major in marketing because I was actually in my 4th year at college with just a major in marketing. At the last minute, I went, oh, I thought marketing meant that I was going to go be creative at an ad agency, and it turns out maybe marketing wasn't the right degree for that. And I've been kind of enjoying this whole internet thing, and it seems fun, and maybe I'll try coding instead. So I just stayed for a 5th year and got another major, and turns out the coding thing's kind of cool. I like it. So far, so good after all these years. But the marketing thing is clear to me because of some of that education that drilled it home for me. So in my marketing degree, one thing that they talked about was the 4 Ps: product, price, place, promotion. A reusable component library is a product. The price is free, so you don't really have much to talk about there, but the other things do matter. And when we talk about the place, the placement of that thing, well, it's digital, but digital things have a place too. And you look at this picture, and I found this picture just really interesting and stared at it a while, and you've probably heard the word juxtaposition. And juxtaposition is this fancy, impressive word for putting 2 things together in an interesting way. And the juxtaposition of the old and decaying and the new and the shiny here makes this image compelling. That's what makes it interesting. And in our code bases, as much as we can, we should try to co-locate related stuff. So by that I mean avoid having a junk drawer of all sorts of things. It surprises me how often I join a team and they say, okay, here's our code base, and I'll do audits for companies all the time. So the way I do an audit is I've got this long checklist. I look at accessibility and security and performance and state management and all these other things. And one of them that I look at is, how are your files set up? How are your folders set up? And a lot of teams never actually had this conversation. It just kind of organically grew, and you get a junk drawer. That junk drawer is a problem because nobody actually knows what components are reusable. People will ask, where are your reusable React components? Because to be clear, if you are building a React application and you don't have any reusable components, that's pretty weird. Like none? Really? None? There should be some, I would think. So I encourage you to create a shared folder. You don't have to call it shared. You could call it reusable. You could call it just components sometimes, or some people just call it UI. But you need a place that everybody knows to look. So this is the difference. I have looked at people's folder structures, and I will see this. I see about, button, home, input, products, and I can kind of intuit. I go, well, I bet about is a page. Button is probably a reusable component. Products sounds like a page, but I'm like, how can I figure out what is what? Whereas over here on the right, it's very clear to me. My pages are all together, and my code for those pages has stuff together. And then I have this separate shared directory that contains my reusable components. This is absolutely obvious stuff, but I say this because a lot of teams aren't doing it. And a lot of teams don't do it because, frankly, we're really busy. And staying organized is a constant battle. Like you go look at your closet. I bet your closet was really organized at one point, and now it probably looks like mine. It just takes time for things to get in the wrong spot, and you got to tidy up. Sorry, what's that?
Do you call pages as components? Do you consider pages components?
Do I consider pages components? Well, components are pages. So, I mean, in React, everything's a component, but maybe I'm missing your question.
And my team then separates the pages into.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, actually, you asked good questions because this is another one we're talking about. She was talking about, do you keep pages, or do you keep components for pages and components for everything else together? Notice what the heading says. Co-locate related stuff. If I have a component that is only used on one page, I want to keep that component with that page because it screams to everybody, this component is only for this page. If I've got it over here in some other weird folder, that infers that it might be globally reusable or broadly unrelated to this page. It also means that I'm bouncing between two very different places, so co-locate related stuff. The only time that I want to get stuff away from the page component is when it's shared. And that's why I'm trying to show this here. We've got pages, which co-locate all the related components, and then a few things that I can't co-locate because they're not tied to a page. And another way to think about this is, you may have components that are reusable, but they're not globally reusable. They're reusable within a domain. Like maybe underneath product, I have a set of reusable components just for product. So I can create a shared folder underneath product, and that infers that all the components in there are just for product pages. Now, another thing as far as reusable components and documentation, treating it like a product, documentation is key. And Storybook is a wonderful way to do this, although Storybook is just one way. And I have a lot of frustrations with Storybook lately. I feel like I spend a huge amount of time trying to keep it running because it feels like they often change the API. When we upgrade other dependencies, sometimes Storybook breaks. When we add dependencies, we have to weave them into Storybook. You don't have to use Storybook. There are other good tools out there. There's Ladle. Ladle is impressive. It's quite fast. Notice that's their tagline, develop and test your React stories faster. It's basically a faster version of Storybook. There's also Docs with a Z, React Style Guidist, or here's the idea I've been toying with here lately. How about I just fork my render? And by that I mean, I don't want to have a separate build process for Storybook. What I want is to use all my dev tooling to either render my app or render my reusable components for my app. And I could do that by forking the render. I could say, what is the environment variable right now? Do I want to render the app, or do I want to render my component page that just shows them all running together? I think this idea could work. I haven't actually used it with a client yet, but I'm eager to try it. Has anybody ever tried this idea? Because if you think about it, it's not technically difficult at all, but it's just a question of, okay, if you do this, you are losing a few things. One thing you're losing is, in Storybook, you get knobs automatically. In Storybook, you get search automatically. You get the sorting. So you'd have to live without some of that or maybe implement some of it yourself. But my thought is, if I created a component like Storybook that just did that, you could just slap it into your forked render and you're good. This is a business idea. I'm offering it for free because I would like to buy it from you. So, okay. So when it comes to docs, another thing that's very important, you don't want to build them by hand. When I built that big component library, well, my team, I should say, when we all built that component library together, we did not create our docs by hand, we generated them. And React DocGen is a fantastic tool for this. If you've never heard of it, here's how it works. This picture shows it. I've got this component over here on the left, and notice how the component is called my component. It has comments up above to describe what it is. I have an interface up above. I have JS doc style comments above the prop. And what I get is this chunk of JSON that describes the component. So think about the power that I have once I have this JSON object with all the metadata about my components. I can go build my own custom documentation. So I've built custom docs that looks beautiful and it's branded custom for the project, and every time we hit save, the docs are updated because React DocGen is running and watching. It's super cool. This is a really nice way to build docs. And you want to generate them because that makes sure that the code and the docs stay in sync. It also makes your code more readable. Like, look at this. Every time I'm reading the code, I've got these nice comments up above that document what the prop does. Also, these comments come through in your editor. They come through on autocomplete support. As I'm starting to write a prop, I can see what that prop is for. It also enforces consistency as well. Skip past this one. So, in summary, reusable components are a product. So branding matters, publicity matters, and support matters. This support one is key too. We had a team of 6 people plus me because we had dozens of teams using our components, and that kept us very busy because they were constantly asking for new things, pointing out bug fixes. We were dealing with updates in there. We had to stay on the latest version of React, and at the time, React was revving pretty quickly. This was more back in the 14, 15, 16 days where React was moving fast. So it was a lot of work for us to keep up with all the good stuff there. And again, if we didn't support them, they won't use us. This is not the field of dreams. We had to be responsive to people, and also us dog fooding there really helped. So my opinion also is you probably need a full-time staff. You need at least one person who's responsible for this. If you try to do it on the side, it tends to languish. And again, think about all the good ways out here, and look at these sites. Look at how beautiful MUI's docs are. This looks like a product. This looks like a product. This looks like a product. It looks... Now, Ant Design needs a little work. It's fine, but I feel like it's not as fancy. Their components are nice, but a lot of this almost looks like it was made by Apple. It's got a nice site. So this talk was a very short run through, 6 hours and 20 minutes of the real conversation here. I published this course way back in 2017, so you might think, well, that's not worth watching. Well, you might be right. This I would like to update it, but frankly, it's timeless information. Everything that I shared in here is the same sorts of things that I share in there. When I created this course, I expected it to be short, like most of my courses, and then I realized all of these topics are a lot more complicated than you think when you really dig into them and see all the ways around that. So I have a number of courses out on Pluralsight. If that's of interest, they've got free trials as well, but I have React, JavaScript, C#, and so on. This slide summarizes the points that I made, so if you wanted that, I will also tweet out the slides afterwards, but if I was going to tweet it, I would probably also want to take a picture of your smiling faces. That reminded me. I'm going to take it from this side. If you want the slides, take a picture of this. That QR code will take you, or I will be tweeting out the picture that I just took along with the link to the slides if that's helpful. I am HouseCor on Twitter, HouseCor, and there's also a link down there to my notes. I've got a bunch of notes out on Twitter about reusable components that just don't fit in the slides, but are also, I think, useful. The last thing I'll say in here is I'm a React consultant. This is what I do. All I do is React consulting, and I help a lot of different teams do that. You can find me at reactjsconsulting.com. So I help companies transition to React, and I help them improve the way that they're working on front ends in general. Automated testing and accessibility are 2 areas that I particularly tend to help people, but lots of ways on that front. I think that's it. Y'all, I think it's time for a keynote, and thanks for listening. Have a great day. See ya.